right, everybody, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving straight into the deep end of the pool with something that I know a lot of our listeners are going to be interested in, particularly those that have been following along, for a while, and that's this recent action we've been seeing with gold and silver prices.
Absolutely.
It's been all over the headlines, and it's hard to miss, and
it really is.
we figured we'd kind of take a little bit deeper of a dive into it today and also look at the idea that's kind of been, floating around out there for years about this potential price suppression when it comes to gold and silver.
Okay.
So
yeah, makes sense.
You flagged a really interesting article for us. It's titled Gold and Silver Break Free, The End of Suppression.
Yeah.
Pretty catchy title.
It is.
And this was published just recently, March 14th, 2025.
Yeah.
So we're trying to stay on top of things here on the deep dive.
As always.
So our goal today is really to get beyond just the headlines. We want to really get into the historical context of what's been going on with gold and silver, understand what's actually happening right now, and also take a look at what this article, suggests might be coming up on the horizon for these precious metals.
Yeah, I think a key thing today is to try and, look, we could talk about this for hours and hours and get really bogged down in all the details. But, as always, we want to try and provide that clarity without overwhelming everybody with too much.
Yeah, and there's a ton of information out there, and we just want to try and cut to the chase.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's jump right in. The article kicks off by taking a look back, and the first thing that caught my eye was this thing called the London Gold Pool back in the 1960s.
Right.
And this was something, I'll admit, I had heard about it before, but I never really understood exactly what it was. So for those of you out there who maybe haven't heard about the London Gold Pool or don't really have a grasp on it, can you just give us a quick overview of what exactly the idea was there?
Yeah. So the London Gold Pool essentially was a cooperative effort by a group of central banks.
Okay.
And the idea was they were trying to fix the price of gold at $35 an ounce.
Wow. So can you imagine?
Yeah, back then.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
It is crazy when you think about what gold's trading at now.
Yeah, so how are they trying to pull that off?
So they did this by pooling their gold reserves.
Oh, okay.
And then basically they would actively intervene in the market by either buying or selling gold to keep it at that $35 level.
So almost like trying to just
almost like
put a ceiling on it.
A lid on it, trying to keep it contained.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me like you're almost trying to hold back.
Yeah.
Something really powerful with that.
Yeah.
A powerful force, exactly.
And so what ultimately happened with that? I mean, you can't just hold back the tide forever, right?
You can't hold back the tide forever, and that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So, as you can imagine, this demand for gold, particularly at that time, there was a lot of, concerns about the U.S. dollar.
Okay.
And as faith in the dollar started to waver, that put a lot of pressure on gold.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So they were having to use more and more of their reserves
to try
and keep it at that level.
Contained.
Yeah. And eventually it just became too much.
Yeah.
And in 1968, the whole thing collapsed.
Wow.
So it couldn't be sustained.
So they couldn't hold it back.
They couldn't hold it back.
And that kind of shows you that, you can try and manipulate things, but ultimately, the market's going to do what it's going to do.
I think that's a really interesting takeaway from this historical example, because it shows you that, markets, and we talk about supply and demand.
Right.
It's not just a theory. Like, actually, when you try and, sort of, put artificial controls in place ultimately.
Yeah.
Supply and demand will win out.
Win out.
Yeah.
So.
And what happened after the gold pool collapsed was really interesting because, as you can imagine, once that, control mechanism's gone, the price just exploded.
Yeah.
So by January 1980, gold had reached something like $850 an ounce.
Oh, wow.
So it's this huge
it's a big
percentage increase in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, huge move.
Huge move.
Okay.
So it kind of shows you what can happen when these kind of mechanisms break down.
Yeah. Okay, so fast forward quite a few years, the article brings up these allegations by Andrew Maguire back in 2010.
Right.
And this is something that a lot of our listeners, I think, will remember. And it seems much more recent. It seems more relevant to the whole discussion of, potential suppression that's going on.
Exactly.
So what exactly did Maguire claim was happening back then?
So Maguire, he'd been working as a commodities trader.
Okay.
And he basically came forward very publicly and made some really serious allegations of manipulation in the gold and silver markets. His main point was that...
What did he say they were doing specifically?
He was saying that major banks were using these huge quantities of paper contracts. So things like futures and options to artificially depress the price of physical gold and silver.
So instead of reflecting true supply and demand, they were just...
Exactly. He was saying this is not about genuine hedging.
Right.
This is about basically keeping the price artificially low so that they could profit from that.
Okay. And so this all led to a CFTC investigation, right?
It did. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission?
Right.
They launched an investigation.
And what came of that? I mean, obviously these things are kind of complex, right?
They are complex. And, often you don't get a huge amount of transparency on these investigations.
Yeah.
But... what we have seen is that financial institutions have faced penalties for manipulating commodity markets in the past.
Okay.
Now...
But not necessarily directly admitting to,
You don't often see a direct admission of, this kind of widespread conspiracy to suppress gold and silver prices.
Right.
But certainly Maguire's allegations... I think really added fuel to the fire.
Yeah, for those who...
already suspected that something...
Exactly, for those who already had those suspicions.
...was going on.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, right?
It makes you question.
If it's even possible to manipulate things.
How transparent and fair are these markets?
Yeah, it's a big question.
Big questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so that gives us some really good background and historical context.
Yeah.
Now let's kind of shift to what's happening in the here and now. And the article mentions some pretty significant price jumps, both for gold and silver.
It does.
So can you kind of walk us through what we've been seeing lately in terms of the price movements?
Sure. So the article says that gold recently hit an all-time high.
Okay.
It's broken above $2,900 an ounce.
Wow. Which is...
Yeah, that's
pretty remarkable.
That's a huge milestone.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is that the technical analysis that they talk about suggests that once gold broke through these key resistance levels, you can kind of think of those as...
those price ceilings.
Price ceilings. Yeah, levels that it's struggled to break above in the past.
And once it breaks through that...
there's not really a lot, technically speaking.
Yeah. Stopping it from going even higher.
Wow.
So potentially even beyond $3,000.
So $3,000 is kind of a,
it's a big
psychological level.
Psychological barrier. Yeah.
Okay, so gold's been on the move.
Gold's been on the move, and silver hasn't been slouching either.
Okay.
It's seen some pretty big moves as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what about silver? What's been going on there?
So silver's climbed above $33 an ounce.
Okay.
And the article points out that analysts are seeing a lot of upside potential for silver.
So it could keep...
Yeah, especially if you buy into this whole suppression narrative that we've been talking about.
Okay.
Because the thinking is that silver has kind of lagged behind gold. Gold's had these huge moves.
Right.
Silver's kind of been playing catch up.
So they think there's still room for silver to run.
Potentially a lot of ground that it could make up.
Okay.
Yeah.
The article also brings up this gold to silver ratio.
Yeah.
And it says that it's currently around 88.9 to 1.
That's right.
What does that number actually tell us?
So the gold to silver ratio is basically saying, how many ounces of silver does it take to buy 1 ounce of gold at the current prices?
Okay.
So right now, you'd need almost 89 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold.
Wow.
Now, historically, that ratio has been a lot closer to around 65 to 1. So what that suggests...
It's a little out of whack.
It's a little out of whack, yeah. And it suggests that potentially...
Silver's undervalued.
Silver is undervalued relative to gold.
Interesting.
Based on their historical relationship.
Okay.
So if that historical balance were to, come back into play, then that could mean that silver has a much bigger percentage increase potentially than gold.
Okay, so here's where I think things get really interesting. The article then goes on to talk about some of the real shifts that are happening within the financial system itself that might be contributing to all of this price action we've been seeing.
Right.
The first thing that it mentions is this surge in demand for physical gold.
It's not just on paper anymore.
It's not just people trading contracts, you know?
Great.
It's people actually wanting to hold the metal.
Yeah, they want the real thing.
You want the real thing.
Yeah.
So what do you make of that?
Well, I think it's really interesting because, you know, the article highlights this big increase in investors, particularly in, you know, places like New York.
Okay.
You know, big financial centers.
Yeah.
They're actually wanting to hold physical gold.
Okay.
So, you know, that could mean a couple of things.
Right.
I mean, maybe there's a lack of trust.
Yeah, a lack of trust in the system, maybe?
In the system, Maybe they're just worried about you know, what's happening in the economy, and they want something tangible, something they can actually hold.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and when people actually want to hold the physical commodity instead of just, you know, a derivative of it, that's going to put upward pressure on the price.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not just individual investors either, right?
No, it's not.
I mean, the article talks about central banks.
Central banks are buying a lot of gold.
They're buying a lot of gold, like a lot.
Yeah, I think the article says it's one of the strongest periods of gold buying we've seen in recent history.
What does that tell you?
I mean, to me, that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
You know, these are the institutions that are supposed to be, you know, managing our national reserves and making sure everything's, you know, stable.
Right.
And they're basically saying, you know what, we want gold.
We want real assets.
We want real assets.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we're not so sure about these fiat currencies anymore.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So you've got, you know...
individuals wanting to hold the actual metal. You've got central banks loading up their vaults.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems like a pretty...
The shift in...
fundamental shift in demand.
Demand, yeah.
Yeah.
It really is.
Okay, so then the article goes on to talk about what some of the major financial institutions are saying about all of this.
Right.
And it specifically mentions Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan.
Yeah.
So these are, you know, pretty influential players.
They're big players.
In the market. Yeah, they can definitely move markets.
They move markets. So what are they saying?
So what's really interesting is that they've actually, you know, they've revised their outlook on gold picks.
It's bullish.
Yeah. And they've increased their price targets.
Wow. So they're saying...
Yeah, so they're basically saying, you know, we think gold's going to go higher.
Higher.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I think that's a pretty big deal.
Because they're basically admitting...
Yeah. I mean...
that they might have been wrong before.
It's possible, yeah.
Or that maybe the game has changed.
Or that the game has changed.
Right.
Maybe they're seeing something that wasn't there before.
Yeah. Okay, so...
Yeah.
It seems like the article is making this case that maybe this isn't just short-term volatility. You know, these breakouts in gold and silver prices that we've been seeing.
Yeah.
Maybe this is the start of something bigger.
Yeah.
Maybe they're finally starting to move towards...
That's the central argument.
...a price level that reflects their true value.
Yeah.
Would you say that's a fair assessment?
I think that's a really good summary of what the article's saying.
Okay.
You know, they're saying, look, we've got all this historical precedent. You know, we've seen how hard it is to actually control these markets.
Right.
We've got this current price action.
Yeah.
You know, gold and silver on the move. You've got this huge demand for physical gold.
Yeah.
You've got the central banks buying it up.
Right.
And you've got these major institutions changing their tune.
Yeah.
So you put it all together, and it does seem like we could be at a turning point.
Okay, and specifically for silver, the article reiterates this historical pattern of silver really kind of taking off once it starts a sustained move higher.
Yeah, so historically, silver has tended to outperform gold in terms of percentage gains when you have a bull market.
So if gold really is, you know, entering this bull market.
If gold really is taking off.
Silver could really
could potentially see some really big gains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to note that even, you know, some of the analysts and investors who have been, you know, vocal in the past about this whole suppression narrative. They're viewing this as kind of a...
Yeah, like it's confirming...
validation of what they've been saying.
What they've been saying all along, yeah. So it's interesting to see how, you know how the narrative's evolving.
Right, yeah.
You know, you have these guys who've been saying for years, gold and silver are undervalued because of all this manipulation.
And now they're saying they're being proven right.
Well, this could be it.
Yeah.
This could be the moment.
Okay. Yeah. So as we wrap things up here, let's just kind of recap some of the key takeaways from this article. Gold and silver break free. The end of suppression.
Really?
So we've looked at the history of, attempts to control gold prices. We looked at some of the allegations of manipulation in the markets. We looked at these huge price surges we're seeing right now in both gold and silver.
Right.
The fact that people actually want to hold the metal,
the physical
gold, that central banks are loading up their vaults, and that these big institutions are changing their tune.
It's a lot to digest.
It is a lot to digest.
But I think the article does a good job of, laying out this argument that potentially we are coming to the end of this period where gold and silver have been artificially suppressed. And that they're going to, start to move towards their true value.
And it makes you wonder, right? I mean, if all of this is happening.
It's a big if.
Yeah, it's a big if.
But if it is, what does that mean?
Yeah, what does that
for the bigger picture?
Yeah, what does that mean for our understanding of, value?
What is value?
What is value?
What is money?
What is money? What does it mean for the stability of the entire system? I mean, are we seeing this kind of
are we seeing
reassessment of the role of precious metals?
A shift.
Yeah. Something to think about.
It is something to think about.
So I want to thank everybody for tuning in. To this deep dive.
As always.
We've just kind of given you a snapshot here of what this article is saying. Just a taste. But there's a lot more to explore.
There's a lot more out there.
So
keep digging. Keep asking questions.
Do your own research.
And let us know what you find.
Yeah. All right, everybody. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
On the deep dive.